Thank you for joining me today. I'm really glad that you're interested in the work I'm doing with new immigrants to the United States. Um, and I'm going to talk a little bit about me for a second, and then I'd love to hear who you are. So I'm Julie Mann. I am an ESL and human rights teacher at Newcomers High School, where I've been blessed to teach for the last 21 years. And human rights and mindfulness are my passions. So I bring that into my work all the time. So you see me there doing yoga with my students to help them connect to mindfulness of the body. And I was hoping that maybe in the chat box, you all could write down your name, your location, where you're teaching, your passion, if you could just type quickly so I get a sense of who's with me right now.
The names and locations tend to be there already, so maybe they can just type their passions or what they're interested in.
Great. Yeah. Okay, that would be great. Not seeing anything. Oh, great. See a lot of people working with ESL, migrant farm worker students, refugee student education, wonderful. Math and science. Great. Passion, social justice, woohoo, mindfulness, yoga, great, yay. Love it, love it, love it. Great, okay. I'm going to keep going, but thanks everyone. That's wonderful. It's a really diverse group. Super. So a little bit about Newcomers High School. There it is right there in the photo. We're located in beautiful Long Island City, Queens. We have students from over 30 countries speaking over 20 different languages. 100% of our students are new immigrants to the United States. They're all English language learners. And it's considered a high needs school because all of our students qualify for free breakfast and free lunch. Oh, I see music and employment as a passion. Great. Love it. So I see where you're all working, so I'm not going to ask but if any of you have any other connections to immigrants, like maybe you're an immigrant yourself, or I'm getting a sense from what you typed already that many of you are ESL teachers, and it looks like the group that's great. Wonderful. So I'm just going to keep going. So today I'm going to be talking about a project I did that revolves around sharing our stories. And I put one of my favorite quotes here by Mother Teresa. If we have no peace, it is because we have forgotten that we belong to one another. And oh man, in the last couple of weeks, this quote is ever important for me and for the country. But I wrote a question there: how can sharing our stories help us remember the message of this quote? So if you could just, in the chat box, type your thoughts, responses to that quote, I would love it. So again, if we have no peace, it is because we have forgotten that we belong to one another. Yeah, Brent says, it reminds us that we are all connected. Caitlin, sharing our stories can help us, oh, it's going fast by me, sorry, become part of a community. Kids really connect, belong to one another. There's similarities in our different struggles. When we listen mindfully and without judgment, we come to realize that we are all human and want safety. War is breakdown of communication. Sharing stories allows us to see similarities and differences. Stories reveal our perspectives, listening. We're all one and we come from the same source. Beautiful. These are beautiful responses. Thank you. So in a minute, I'm going to talk about my project. It's called Building Bridges. So the Building Bridges Welcoming Stories Project. And you see here in this photo some of my beautiful students sharing their stories with each other. So in this project that we did in my class, students wrote their immigration stories, including stories of the people who welcomed them to the United States and any action they took recently to pay it forward to welcome someone else. I believe that, as you all have been mentioning so beautifully, it is through their stories that we can educate the world about the rich and wonderful people my students and their ancestors are, the extraordinary experiences they've had, the goals and dreams they have for their lives here, and the enormous value they add to this country. So, and I, in the last panel, I heard Claire talking about storytelling also. I think we all use storytelling in our lives in many different ways. I'd love to hear if people have had experiences using storytelling either in their classes, if you're a teacher, or just with your families in your own life. I know that my daughter makes my parents tell her stories every night about their childhood. And so I'd love to hear how some of you use storytelling in your own lives. If you could type that in the chat box, that would be great. Oh, so Leah says we spend a couple of months on storytelling and what stories we want to tell our kids. That's great. Anyone else? Across the Penn State campus, engaging all students using iPods. Interesting. Love it. Bringing in technology. I'm sure they love that too. Sharing your own stories, being vulnerable, helps students to open up with theirs. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great point. Monica says, same here. Leah, I also encourage parents that storytelling is another form of communication. Absolutely. I mean, the parents have such histories to share. Elaborating on a point, remembering content. Stephanie said, when I taught ESL, I wrote a story about how their parents came to the U.S. Great. Interviewing your elders. Yeah, Claire, that's a good one. Textbooks are a form of history, and that's storytelling too. Great. Using stories to make the kids laugh. I love it. Humor is always so good. Perfect. Journaling, bringing in photos, meeting the author. Beautiful. Excellent. Love it. Okay, I'm going to move on, but those are great answers. I can't wait to read more of them. So why else did we do this project? So maybe you recognize Samantha Power there in that photo. So as part of my human rights class, we had an amazing experience this year. Ambassador Samantha Power came to my school to talk to my human rights class about her work with the refugee crisis. And that had been a focus in my human rights class in general. But in preparation for that visit, although my students aren't refugees, they are all immigrants and they all have their own challenging experiences moving from country to country. And, immigration itself can be a really traumatic experience. Escaping famine, war, poverty, living with complete strangers. And so I thought, to give Ambassador Power some context, it would be great if she could learn the stories of my students. And so here in this photo, you see Samantha Power talking to my students. They're all so engaged with what she's sharing. She's such an amazing upstander. That was quite an experience. And they had come prepared with their stories, so they had a lot to share with her as well. It was quite a dialogue. So now I'm going to talk a bit about the project itself. So the project had 3 components. Step 1 was about their journey, and it began with a guided journal entry about their specific story coming to the United States. We started that in class, and students wrote in class in their journals for about an hour. They wrote about a variety of prompts, and there's a Dropbox link at the end of my presentation that's live that you can all access, that has all of the prompts, all of the steps that I did, in case anyone wants it. And they're in Word, so you can modify them. But anyway, they talked about life in their native countries, their family history, their immigration experience, how they feel today, their hopes, their dreams, their goals, where they imagine themselves in 10 years. There were a lot of questions. So I did that to keep them going, but the questions were optional. So if they felt like they had a lot to say about one question, they stopped and wrote about that. And then, as you see here, we met regularly to share these different steps. So here you see them sharing their journal entries in the photo. And then they took that journal entry and turned it into a first draft, which they came back and shared with a partner. So there was a lot of pure editing and pure reflection all the way throughout. And then in part 2, second phase was they talked about a specific person who welcomed them. Somebody who, when they got to the United States, this person either recognized their talents and had a powerful impact on them, like a teacher or some other kind of mentor, or somebody who helped them, show them the ropes, you know, help them start their new life in the US. Someone who helped them, their parents, their family adjust to American life. What did they do for you? How did you feel? How do you feel you're different from their help and involvement? And do you still keep in touch with that person? And they ended with, if they could talk to that person now, what would they say to them? So again, those questions are all in the Dropbox folder. I know I'm going kind of fast. And here in the photo, you see one of the representatives from Samantha Power's office. They came kind of to vet our class. And they each broke up at the tables. We were sharing our stories, and you see him there sharing his family immigration story. So the students were really eager to hear about that. Step 3 was to complete a welcoming action. So in my human rights class, students have to do community service. It's part of the class. I mean, all high school students have to do community service anyway. But in this round, they actually used their own experience as kind of a more advanced immigrant, because they've been here for a little while longer, to go out and welcome another newcomer. So, and then they wrote about this experience. At first, they started by talking about what they had wished someone had done for them. And then they went out and did that thing for a newcomer. And they wrote about who they helped, how it went, and what they gained from the experience. So they got to pay it forward and really take action and have that empowering moment. And it was great because it built community service right into this writing assignment. And so we see our students proudly sharing those welcoming actions in the photos. So one of my students from China said, "It feels great when I see someone can do well with my assistance, and it makes me feel useful since I can truly help someone. I believe that people's caring for other people is the bond that connects everybody, and it makes a society of harmony. I believe he," meaning the student he helped, "will do the same kind of things for students who come to school afterwards." So again, I hope you're seeing all, right back to that Mother Teresa quote about we belong to one another and building bridges and this action. And as I mentioned, every week we had these writing meetings. So we met in groups to share and refine our stories. And each week students had different partners at these lovely tables in the library. So partners use editing sheets. Again, they're in the Dropbox to give each other feedback and share their stories in the different stages. And they looked at the content of each other's drafts. So did you show, not tell? Do you have a hook? Do you answer who, what, when, where, why, and how questions? And here you see students sharing and defending their choices and giving each other feedback. And as a final outcome, we made a book, the Building Bridges Welcoming Stories Project. And I think you've all been given I know in the Dropbox folder, there's a PDF of the book, so you have access to that for sure. But I think you've been given some targeted stories for today's focus. And so first we shared our stories in class. We read each other's stories. We wrote what we learned, what we enjoyed on Post-it notes, and we attached those to the stories just walking around the room. And we created a book, as I mentioned. We printed it. Everybody got a copy. So we had a book signing party. We made a PDF of it. So that was shared with organizations who help immigrants, like the American Immigration Council, Facing History and Ourselves, the Anti-Defamation League, Not in Our Town. Basically, anyone who wanted it, we gave it to, because it's my hope that as these stories get out there in the world, we start building even more bridges and bringing us back to that Mother Teresa quote about us all belonging to each other. And, I'd love to talk a little bit about the impact of the project. So you're about to watch a clip of a film made of a similar project I did in 2011. We're going to see about 2 minutes of this video. The whole video is 8 minutes long, and the link to it is somewhere. So you'll be able to access, if you want to see the whole video, you're welcome to. And as you watch the clip, I'd love it if you could think about ways that you see bridges being built. And so when the clip is done, please post your reactions to it. Anything you notice, your thoughts, connections to that quote from the beginning, anything. Here we go.
In this year's project, called Building Bridges, Newcomer students will share their personal immigration stories, and the St. Luke students will interview the newcomers about their lives and turn the findings into research papers.
We include our story as immigrants, what difficulties we have faced, what difficulties we had to pass through when we first came here, and what's our condition now.
What was coming to America like?
It was full of excitement, and I knew that our life is going to be far more better than before because we have more opportunities here than living in Nepal.
Was it hard to adapt to America?
Yeah, that was hard because like it's not the same food, it's not the same language, it's not the same like friends and a school, because you need to start like a new life again.
So did you feel ashamed to be an immigrant?
Not really, but I feel ashamed to tell my story, you know, how I came here in the United States, because we came here in the United States because of the civil war in Congo, and in part of that, as a result of the civil war, my father was a victim of that. That's kind of, anytime I think of that, it makes me kind of hate, like, you know, those what they did to my father. My buddy's name is Owen. He's an amazing kid. I spoke to my buddy as he's leaving, was like, I love your story, and if you mind, I can use your story to tell people. I was like, go ahead. That's what I wanted. I wanted to publish it so people can see that these people came to the United States because of something.
Julie's students, like the larger immigrant population, are struggling with the perception that their presence in this country is a threat, and that their differences make them dangerous.
It's important that people get to know that immigrants are not bad people, that we're not here to take away things from Americans, that we're here to help, to work, to get a better future, a better life.
So I'm seeing this project builds a sense of community among students with similar experiences. Their voices are heard and valued. Thank you, Stephanie. Rebecca said, wow, that look is powerful. Yeah, Owen was pretty shocked when he found out that Guy's father was murdered in Congo. And I lost the other, let me see if I can scroll back up. Oops. David said, I recall a low-achieving student, not an immigrant, who scarcely did anything in my class until I invited the students to interview an adult about how they use chemistry. The student was really inspired by the project and interviewed her father. Oh, sorry, I think that I'm in the wrong place. Yes, sorry. I love the peer interview aspects of this project. Yes, the students are immediately connected. Peer interviewing builds speaking skills and also confidence. Absolutely. Great. I want to watch it all. Yeah, you can't. And it's it's 8 minutes. So if you have time, it's on YouTube. Julie, these stories are so touching. Thank you. Yeah, these students, I'm so lucky. I have a great job with really amazing people. So thank you for those reactions. And I hope, again, we're getting back to that. We all belong to one another, right? That beautiful Mother Teresa quote. So now, it's chat room time. So apparently you've been given featured stories, I hope. And so in a second, you're going to go into chat rooms. And there are 4 questions here. So it would be great for you to answer them. And the questions are, list the values contained in your chosen story. Are these shared values with people in your community? Are there aspects of this story that defy stereotypes? And if so, how? How might you go about using these stories in your setting? So if you wanted to do a project like this, what variations could you think of? I can't wait to hear that. Digital, live performance, getting media involved, collaborating with other schools. What would you do? I'd love to hear. And what challenges do you expect to encounter and how would you deal with them? Okay, so in the adult other group, stories are very effective because students can find ways to relate to them. Even if they are not immigrants themselves, they have likely experienced a time when they felt alienated. Great. To demonstrate that all immigrants belong to the human race, just like you and me, sure. In the 6 to 12 group, some students are too shy to share their stories. Yes, I think I always work at finding a way for them to open up. I start in groups of 5. My students feel more safe sharing in a small group, a group that they have been working with for a while. Yeah. I always give students other options. I like asking students to complete a chart where they indicate strengths, weaknesses, likes, dislikes of their home nation versus the U.S. Their stories make them human and real, not just a foreigner. Once they share it, they are viewed by others as people. Praise is a powerful tool. A project like this could debunk the myth that immigrants come here to steal someone's job. Most of my students are fleeing instability and violence in Central America and Mexico. Sure, yeah, again, building bridges, totally. And I was, in on that conversation a little bit. I agree that sharing, it's a very delicate situation because a lot of the students have painful stories and they don't want to share them. And so I make space for that also. It's not a you have to do this or else kind of situation. And I also wrote how this project comes at the end of a year of working together. So really building community, building trust. Students really knew each other and felt safe to share. And in the video you saw that year we had buddies. So they had developed a relationship with this other person who really was very interested and held their stories in safety. And so that makes a big difference. And then this year, knowing that the ambassador was interested in their stories made a big difference. So knowing that there are people who are truly interested, that's a piece of it also. From the adult group, Hassan's story was very powerful, but what stuck out to me the most was the impact his father and mother had in his life. The values in Rifa's story were family, determination, asking for help, bravery, and peace. Yes, and authenticity. She sure is. Hold on. Sorry. Defying stereotypes. They don't expect handouts. They desire to integrate into the culture, bringing what they can to the table, so to speak. Rifa was doggedly learning English, and Bangladeshi family were aiding in her pursuit. Victor's story illustrates the hope and heartbreak associated with immigration. People said they would use it to help dispel incorrect assumptions that newcomers want to live off others here in the United States. These stories would be great as a catalyst for getting students to open up about their own experiences. It's been my experience that reading the personal accounts of others is always a sure shot. Well, please use these stories, use them. I would love that. I would assign a story to groups and have them make up questions based on the reading, pretending to interview Rifa, Victor, Pasang. Challenges the closed-mindedness of others. Sure, fear, challenge. There seems to be a divide in my adult class among those who follow the rules and those who might be undocumented. Some learners might not want to share because of the painful experiences of the past, and others may not have yet the vocabulary. Right, so that's great. Those are important points. In the K-5 group, using Skype could connect schools that aren't diverse with more diverse schools. I love it. Drama could showcase these stories. Interviewing elders can connect students with immigration stories. Yes. Also using art to tell stories if students don't have vocabulary. Using current events to teach about immigration and think about push-pull factors. Have students write from the perspective of a migrant. Speaking of the push-pull factors, in that we made a book, and we've made a book several times, and in my classes, we've shared those stories, and other teachers who work with students who are not immigrants but are studying immigration have used the stories to analyze push-pull factors. So that's interesting. I'm wondering if people have other questions or ways that they might modify it. If you can type that into the chat box, that would be great. And while I'm waiting for that to happen, I'll just go on a little bit and say, in my setting, so within my classroom, these are some of the educational benefits I saw from using this project. Quite obviously, I was taking students through the writing process. So teaching students how to show and not tell in their writing, how to complete several drafts of writing, and, you know, basic things that we do all the time, but it was with their own story. So it had that added level of import. And then building community service into a writing project. So when they paid it forward and did a welcoming action, and giving students that opportunity to learn from and with each other. A lot of times in class, they talked about how powerful it was to read their classmates' stories, because even though they knew each other all year, it gave them such a heightened awareness of who their classmates were, and that they weren't alone, that they thought that, oh, only I felt really awful that first day in gym class when I couldn't work the lock. But no, I did too. There was just so many times when students were connecting with the similarities in their struggles and also the uniqueness of their struggles. And so it was very powerful in that way. And then in a larger context, in terms of larger benefits, you know, we've touched upon this all this whole hour, so thank you. But this idea of educating the world about our students' incredible stories, or their parents, or their grandparents, and then building that bridge between immigrants and new communities where they live, breaking those stereotypes. They're not here to steal anybody's job, right? They're here. Why are they here? What are their hopes and dreams? Why are they coming? What have they been through? Giving students a chance to document their journey while it's fresh in their minds. So even if it's a painful story, I worked with many students who were reluctant at first, and like Guy, the student from Congo that you saw in the film, you know, his father was murdered. That was not an easy story for him to share, and he really didn't want to. In fact, he revolted for a while, and I gave him a lot of space, and it was his choice. But in the end, Guy was so happy to have written his story, and he went out with me. We presented that book at all these different conferences, and he was there. He was like my right-hand man, so happy to share his story, because all of a sudden it flipped for him, and something that was very painful for him, not that it wasn't painful anymore, but the fact that people were interested in his story and were learning about what was going on in his country through his story, that was very, very empowering. And also I talked to them about how they're creating primary source historical documents. They are living history. And that empowers and inspires the students. So those were some of the benefits that I noticed. And I think we have a few minutes, if I'm not mistaken. That's my email address, and the next slide has the Dropbox link, but we could take a few minutes here if people want to type in some questions or comments or concerns. I would love to hear from you, so please do. Oh, let's see.
I think it would be good for you to talk a little bit about how this kind of storytelling, these kinds of strategies could be replicated at different education levels. So thinking of like low literacy adults, very young children, how can these be adapted?
You want me to talk about that? Okay. Well, I don't work with very young children, so I'm not gonna be the expert here. I'd love the K-5 people to jump in then. And as far as low literacy adults, I think simpler versions of stories are always possible. Reading a story and then creating their own at whatever capacity. I mean, I asked some really detailed questions, but I think they could be modified and simplified at any level. But I heard people talking in the younger groups about using drama, using artwork, interviewing elders. I think that's great. Yeah, Guy was from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Parts of migration, bringing the adults into the story when you're working with young children. Thank you, Andrea. Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. They feel safer when they're sharing their story with their parents. Absolutely. Little Bird Tales, a great free digital app for K-3 students for storytelling. There's also, I will put a plug in here, not me, but StoryCorps, amazing project. And now there's the StoryCorps app, and they give questions. And so for people who like to use technology, you can actually use the app, record anywhere, send it to StoryCorps, and it gets archived in the National Archive forever. So that's a free way to document stories in a more powerful and or long-lasting way, I should say. Graphic novels are fun for low language. Tell their stories with 6 sentences and 6 images, for example. That's great. Yes, StoryCorps is wonderful. Inviting guests, retired reading specialists, authors from the community. Sure, those are great modifications. Love it. Love it.
I also posted a link to a digital storytelling module that we did with Sarah Burnett last year.
Oh, great.
If you want to take this online, we have it on our workshop website. It's there. If you scroll up the chat box, it's also there. Great resource from Sarah Burnett, another wonderful way to get this out there and to get students involved.
Great. Great. Okay, well, so in closing, this link is live, so you should all be able to click on it, and it will take you to a Dropbox folder where there's a PDF of the whole book. So all 28 stories are there, not just 3. I think you only got 3. And yeah, and please email me if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer them. And I hope you have a great day. Thanks, everyone.